It was a bright morning in the heart of the city, where the glass towers of corporate offices gleamed under the sun. Among the bustling crowd, Maya stepped into one of the most prestigious buildings, clutching her resume tightly in her hands. Her heart was pounding, not just from nerves, but from years of dreaming about this moment. She had worked tirelessly for this opportunity, a chance to land her dream job at one of the top firms in the country. She had the credentials, the experience, and the passion. But deep down, she knew that for someone like her, the path to success was rarely straightforward. Maya was no stranger to challenges. Born and raised in a working-class neighborhood, she'd have faced more than her fair share of obstacles. Yet, her determination had always pushed her forward. She had graduated at the top of her class, earning accolades and respect. But as a black woman in the corporate world, she had often found herself underestimated, overlooked, and sometimes outright dismissed. Today, she hoped things would be different. Today, she was determined to prove her worth. As she walked into the sleek conference room, her confidence faltered slightly. The room was intimidating: polished surfaces, sharp edges, and a long table that seemed to stretch forever. At the end of it sat the man who would be interviewing her, Mr. Jacobs. He was a towering figure in the corporate world, known for his no-nonsense demeanor and high standards. His reputation preceded him, and Maya had spent days preparing for this moment. The interview started smoothly enough. Maya answered each question with precision, her voice steady despite the knots in her stomach. She spoke about her achievements, her vision, and how she could contribute to the company. But as the minutes ticked by, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. Mr. Jacobs' tone grew colder, his questions sharper. He interrupted her repeatedly, barely letting her finish her thoughts. At first, Maya tried to brush it off as part of his tough personality. But then the comments started. It began subtly, a dismissive remark about her background. Then, a condescending question about whether she could handle the pressure of such a high-level role. Maya could feel the sting of his words, but she kept her composure. She had faced worse before, and she wasn't about to let anyone shake her. But when he leaned back in his chair, smirking, and said, "You're quite ambitious for someone with your circumstances," Maya felt her breath catch. She knew exactly what he meant, even if he didn't say it outright. The humiliation was palpable. Maya could feel her cheeks burn as he continued to undermine her qualifications and belittle her achievements. She wanted to stand up and walk out, but something inside her refused to give him the satisfaction. She sat there, her hands clenched under the table, answering every question with grace and dignity. When the interview finally ended, Maya walked out of the room with her head held high, even though her heart felt heavy. That night, as she replayed the interview in her mind, Maya couldn't shake the feeling of injustice. She had worked so hard, yet she had been treated as if she didn't belong. But rather than wallow in despair, Maya made a decision. She wasn't going to let this experience define her. If anything, it fueled her determination even more. She vowed to prove not just to Mr. Jacobs, but to herself that she was capable of greatness. Months turned into years, and Maya's journey was far from easy. She faced setback after setback, but each challenge only strengthened her resolve. She built her career brick by brick, eventually starting her own business. Her company grew rapidly, thanks to her vision and leadership. And then one day, fate brought her back to that same prestigious firm. But this time she wasn't there for an interview. She was there to take over as CEO. Maya's story is one of resilience, courage, and unyielding determination. It's a story that reminds us all that no matter how many doors close in our faces, it's up to us to keep pushing forward, to keep proving our worth, and to create our own opportunities. But how did she do it? How did Maya go from being humiliated in an interview to leading the very company that once dismissed her? Stay tuned to hear the full story, because this is just the beginning. Maya's rise to the top didn't happen overnight. The night of that disastrous interview, as she sat in her small apartment, staring at the city lights through her window, she allowed herself a moment to feel the weight of it all. The humiliation, the anger, and the sadness swept over her like a storm. She thought of all the late nights she'd spent studying, the sacrifices she'd made, and the hurdles she'd already overcome. How could one man, one interview, make her feel so small? But Maya wasn't the kind of person to dwell in her pain for long. By morning, her resolve had hardened into something unshakable. If the corporate world didn't want her, she would build her own path. She knew it wasn't going to be easy, but then again, nothing in her life ever had been. Growing up, she had watched her mother juggle multiple jobs just to keep the lights on and food on the table. Her father had left when she was young, and it had always been just the two of them against the world. Her mother used to tell her, "Maya, you're going to have to work twice as hard to get half as far, but don't you ever let anyone tell you you're not enough." Those words echoed in her mind as she made her next move. Maya decided to take the little savings she had and invest in herself. She signed up for a series of leadership and entrepreneurship courses, determined to sharpen her skills and learn everything she could about running a business. She spent countless hours studying market trends, reading books by successful entrepreneurs, and attending networking events. Each day, she inched closer to her goal, even as the memory of that interview lingered like a shadow in the back of her mind. Her first big breakthrough came when she noticed a gap in the market for small businesses like hers. Maya realized that many startups were struggling to manage their operations efficiently because they couldn't afford the high-cost solutions offered by larger companies. With this insight, she launched her own consulting firm, focusing on affordable, practical solutions for small and medium-sized enterprises. It was a bold move, especially since she was starting with almost no resources, but Maya had an unshakable belief in her vision. In the early days, her office was a tiny desk in the corner of her apartment, and her only employee was herself. She handled everything: client meetings, marketing, finances, and even the late-night cleanup after a long day of work. There were moments when doubt crept in, when she wondered if she was chasing an impossible dream. But every time she felt like giving up, she thought about all the people who had underestimated her, all the times she'd been told she didn't belong. That fire in her belly kept her going. Her first client was a local bakery struggling to keep up with demand. Maya worked tirelessly to streamline their operations, redesign their marketing strategy, and implement cost-saving measures. Within a few months, the bakery's profits had nearly doubled, and word of Maya's work began to spread. More clients followed, and soon she found herself building a reputation as a game-changer for small businesses. She hired her first employee, then her second, and before she knew it, her small consulting firm had grown into a thriving enterprise. But success didn't come without its challenges. Maya often found herself battling stereotypes and biases in the business world. Some potential clients doubted her abilities simply because of her gender and race, while others questioned whether her firm was capable of delivering results. Each time, Maya let her work speak for itself. She poured her heart into every project, earning the trust and respect of her clients one step at a time. As her business grew, so did Maya's confidence. She began to take on bigger clients and more ambitious projects, each one a testament to her resilience and determination. Yet, despite all her success, the memory of that fateful interview never fully faded. It wasn't just about the humiliation. It was about the larger issue of how people like her were often overlooked and underestimated in the corporate world. She knew she wasn't the only one who had faced such challenges, and she wanted to use her platform to make a difference. Maya started mentoring young professionals, especially women of color, who were trying to navigate the same obstacles she had faced. She shared her story openly, not as a tale of triumph, but as a reminder that setbacks didn't define one's worth. Her honesty and authenticity resonated with many, and she became a source of inspiration for others who were chasing their dreams despite the odds. Years passed, and Maya's consulting firm became one of the most respected names in the industry. She had built a team of talented individuals who shared her vision and values, and together they had transformed countless businesses. But despite all her accomplishments, she never forgot where she came from or the journey that had brought her to this point. One day, as Maya was going through her emails, she noticed a subject line that made her pause. Potential partnership opportunity. The email was from none other than the company where she had once interviewed with Mr. Jacobs. Her heart raced as she read through the details. They were interested in collaborating with her firm on a major project. For a moment, she wasn't sure how to feel. Should she accept the opportunity, or was this a chance to finally confront her past? Maya decided to take the meeting, not out of spite, but out of curiosity. She wanted to see how far she had come and how much had changed. When she walked into the same office building years later, it was a surreal experience. The sleek conference room was just as she remembered it, but this time she wasn't there as an applicant. She was there as a respected leader in her industry. To her surprise, Mr. Jacobs was still with the company, though he no longer held the same position of power. When he entered the room and saw Maya, his face registered a flicker of recognition, followed by something that looked like discomfort. He offered a polite smile and extended his hand, but Maya could sense the tension in the air. She remained professional, keeping her composure as they discussed the potential partnership. As the meeting went on, it became clear that Maya's firm was not just an option for them. It was the best option. She could see the respect in the eyes of the other executives at the table, even if Mr. Jacobs struggled to hide his unease. It was a moment of quiet vindication for Maya, but she chose not to dwell on it. She knew her worth, and she didn't need anyone else's validation. After the meeting, Maya took a moment to stand by the large window overlooking the city. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but she had made it. And while she didn't know what the future held, she knew one thing for certain: she would continue to break barriers, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. This wasn't the end of her story, it was only the beginning of a new chapter. The partnership was finalized within weeks. Maya's firm was tasked with leading a critical project for the company, one that would define its future in a competitive market. On the surface, it seemed like a standard business deal, a lucrative opportunity that would further elevate Maya's already growing reputation. But beneath the surface, there was an undeniable tension. The ghost of her past lingered in the halls of the company, and with each meeting, Maya felt a subtle undercurrent of unease. Mr. Jacobs, despite no longer holding a senior role, seemed to make a point of being present in every discussion involving the project. He maintained a cordial facade, but Maya couldn't help but notice the moments when his tone sharpened or his questions became unnecessarily critical. It was as though he was trying to regain some semblance of control, attempting to assert himself in a situation where his power had clearly diminished. Maya, however, refused to be rattled. She responded to every question with confidence, her answers precise and unwavering. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into that interview years ago, and she made sure he knew it. As the project progressed, Maya's team quickly proved their worth. They delivered innovative solutions, streamlined operations, and exceeded every expectation. The executives at the company were impressed, and their praise for Maya and her team grew louder with each milestone they achieved. But the more successful the project became, the more strained Mr. Jacobs appeared. It wasn't just about the work. It was about the fact that Maya, the woman he had once dismissed, was now leading the charge and earning the respect he had long taken for granted. Outside of work, Maya began to notice other ripples from her growing success. She received invitations to speak at conferences and events, where she shared her journey and the lessons she had learned along the way. People were drawn to her authenticity and resilience, and her story resonated with many who had faced similar struggles. But with the spotlight came scrutiny. Articles were written about her, some praising her as a trailblazer, while others questioned whether her rise to success was truly earned. Maya tried not to let the negativity affect her, but there were moments when the weight of it all felt overwhelming. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Maya found herself sitting alone in her office, staring at the city lights outside the window. She thought about how far she had come and how much further she wanted to go. But she also thought about the toll it was taking on her. The long hours, the constant pressure to prove herself, and the lingering doubts that crept in during quiet moments. She reminded herself that this wasn't just about her. It was about paving the way for others who looked like her, who had been told they didn't belong. As the project neared its final stages, Maya uncovered a potential issue that could jeopardize its success. It was a minor oversight in the company's initial planning, something that had been overlooked long before her firm was brought on board. Fixing it would require additional resources and time, but Maya knew it was necessary to ensure the project's success. When she brought the issue to the attention of the executives, most of them agreed with her assessment. But Mr. Jacobs, true to form, saw it as an opportunity to undermine her. "This wasn't an issue before you got involved," he said in a meeting, his voice laced with skepticism. "Are you sure this isn't just an excuse to inflate your budget?" Maya felt a surge of frustration but kept her composure. She calmly explained the technical details, outlining why addressing the issue was crucial and how it could have far-reaching consequences if ignored. The room fell silent as the executives absorbed her explanation. Most of them nodded in agreement, but Mr. Jacobs continued to push back, his arguments growing more desperate. It wasn't until one of the younger executives, a woman named Clara, spoke up that the tide truly turned. "Maya's right," Clara said firmly. "She's identified a problem that none of us caught, and she's offering a solution. Isn't that exactly why we brought her firm on board in the first place?" Maya glanced at Clara, silently grateful for her support. The room eventually sided with Maya, approving the additional resources needed to address the issue. Mr. Jacobs, however, remained visibly displeased. As the meeting ended, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't done trying to derail her. Sure enough, rumors began to circulate within the company. Whispers about Maya's leadership, her decisions, and even her character began to spread. She heard from her team that some employees were questioning whether her firm was as competent as it appeared. It was clear that someone was trying to tarnish her reputation, and Maya had a good idea who was behind it. But rather than confront the rumors directly, she decided to let her work do the talking. Maya doubled down on her efforts, working tirelessly to ensure the project's success. She held late-night strategy sessions with her team, went over every detail with a fine-tooth comb, and maintained an open line of communication with the executives. Slowly but surely, the results began to speak for themselves. The project was not only back on track, but also exceeding expectations in ways no one had anticipated. But the tension with Mr. Jacobs remained. Maya could see the cracks in his carefully constructed facade, the moments when his frustration slipped through. It wasn't just about the project, it was about what Maya represented. She was living proof that the barriers he had tried to enforce could be broken, that the system he had benefited from was changing, and that terrified him. As the final weeks of the project approached, Maya found herself facing a choice. She could continue to ignore Mr. Jacobs' attempts to undermine her, focusing solely on the work, or she could address the conflict head-on. Part of her wanted to confront him, to demand an explanation for his behavior. But another part of her knew that doing so might play into his hands, giving him the reaction he was likely hoping for. Instead, Maya chose a third option. She decided to focus on her ultimate goal, proving that she and her team were the best at what they did. If Mr. Jacobs wanted to see her fail, she would show him what success truly looked like. And as the final days of the project unfolded, it became clear that Maya's strategy was working. But even as the finish line approached, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing. The stakes were higher than ever, and she knew that not everyone in the room wanted to see her succeed. The tension was palpable, and the air seemed charged with unspoken conflicts and unresolved tensions. Maya braced herself for whatever was coming, knowing that the hardest battles were often fought in the moments just before victory. As the final presentation of the project drew closer, the tension in the company reached its peak. Maya and her team had poured every ounce of their energy into ensuring every detail was perfect. This wasn't just a professional milestone, it was a statement, a culmination of years of perseverance and hard work. The boardroom where the presentation would take place was buzzing with anticipation. Executives, stakeholders, and even members of other departments had gathered, eager to see the outcome of the ambitious project. Maya arrived early that morning, her mind racing with every possible scenario. She had rehearsed her portion of the presentation countless times, ensuring she was ready for even the toughest questions. But no amount of preparation could fully calm the storm of emotions she felt. She wasn't just presenting a project, she was facing her past head-on. She would stand before the same company that had once dismissed her, the same people who had doubted her capabilities, and prove to them just how wrong they had been. Near the back, his expression was unreadable, but his presence alone was enough to remind her of the stakes. She could feel his gaze on her, as if he was waiting for her to stumble, to falter under the pressure. But Maya refused to let him shake her confidence. This was her moment, and she was determined to own it. The presentation began, with Maya's team walking through the technical aspects and key milestones of the project. Their confidence was evident, and the room seemed genuinely impressed. When it was Maya's turn to speak, she stepped forward with a calm yet commanding presence. She outlined the broader vision of the project, emphasizing not only its success, but also its long-term impact on the company's future. Her words were measured and precise, carrying the weight of someone who had not only mastered her craft, but also understood the bigger picture. As she spoke, Maya noticed subtle reactions from the audience, nods of approval, murmurs of agreement. But she also caught glimpses of doubt, whispers exchanged between certain individuals. She knew not everyone in the room was rooting for her. And then, as she concluded her portion and opened the floor to questions, the atmosphere shifted. The first few questions were straightforward, focused on technical details and projections. Maya answered them with ease, her responses backed by data and thorough analysis. But then, just as she was beginning to feel the momentum of the room shifting in her favor, Mr. Jacobs raised his hand. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. His question was sharp, pointed, and layered with subtle implications. He framed it as a concern about the feasibility of one aspect of the project, but Maya could tell it was designed to undermine her credibility. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how she would respond. Maya paused, gathering her thoughts. She could feel the weight of the moment, the unspoken tension hanging in the air. But instead of letting the question rattle her, she leaned into her confidence. She addressed his concerns with clarity, breaking down the technicalities and backing her response with data. Her voice remained steady, her tone professional yet firm. She wasn't just defending her work, she was asserting her authority, making it clear that she belonged in that room. But Mr. Jacobs wasn't done. He followed up with another question, this one even more pointed. It was a challenge, a deliberate attempt to throw her off balance. Maya could see the flicker of satisfaction in his expression, as though he thought he had found a weak spot. The room was tense, the audience hanging on every word. Maya took a deep breath. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, but she refused to let it show. Instead, she addressed the question head-on, her response even more detailed and confident than before. As she spoke, she could see the doubt in Mr. Jacobs' eyes begin to shift into something else, something resembling frustration. He had underestimated her, and now he was realizing his mistake. The room erupted into quiet murmurs as Maya finished her response. The tension was palpable, but so was the growing sense of respect from many in the audience. Maya returned to her seat, her heart pounding, but her composure intact. She had faced the challenge head-on and emerged stronger. But the day wasn't over. As the meeting progressed, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something was still brewing. Mr. Jacobs remained uncharacteristically quiet for the rest of the presentation, his expression unreadable. Maya knew he wasn't the type to accept defeat easily, and she'd braced herself for whatever move he might make next. As the presentation wrapped up and the room began to clear, Maya found herself face to face with Mr. Jacobs. He offered her a tight-lipped smile, his eyes betraying a mix of emotions. "Impressive work," he said, his tone carefully neutral. But Maya could hear the undercurrent of resentment in his voice, the unspoken acknowledgement of her victory. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady. She met his gaze without flinching, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing any hint of doubt. This wasn't just about proving herself, it was about reclaiming her power, about standing tall in the face of those who had tried to tear her down. As Maya left the room, she felt a surge of emotions: relief, pride, and a lingering sense of anticipation. The project's success was within reach, but she knew the battle wasn't over. There were still obstacles to overcome, challenges to face, and tensions to resolve. But for the first time in a long time, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was ready for whatever came next, knowing that every step of the journey had prepared her for this moment. The next day, as Maya returned to her office, she was greeted by an unusual silence from her team. Typically, the energy was palpable. Laughter, discussions, and the hum of productivity filled the space. But this morning, something was different. Her assistant, a reliable presence who always greeted her with a warm smile, avoided her gaze. Maya could feel the tension, the unspoken worry it seemed to hang in the air. She set her bag down and walked toward the small meeting area where her team often gathered, sensing that something was amiss. "Maya, we need to talk," one of her senior team members, Arjun, said cautiously. He held a tablet in his hand, its screen glowing with what looked like an email. "This came through late last night, and we thought you should see it right away." Maya took the tablet and scanned the contents of the email. Her stomach tightened as she read the words. The email was a formal complaint, supposedly from one of the executives at the company they were working with. It accused Maya's firm of cutting corners, inflating costs, and failing to meet their commitments. The accusations were unfounded, a complete fabrication, but the tone of the email was severe enough to cast a shadow over their reputation. What made it worse was that the complaint had been copied to other stakeholders, escalating it far beyond what seemed reasonable for a simple misunderstanding. Maya's first instinct was disbelief. This wasn't just an attack on her company's integrity, it was personal. She could feel it. The phrasing, the timing, the pointed nature of the accusations. It all seemed too calculated to be a coincidence. And then it hit her. Mr. Jacobs. She didn't have proof, but she knew, deep down, that he was behind this. His dissatisfaction during the presentation, his subtle attempts to undermine her. This felt like the next move in his campaign to discredit her. The stakes had just been raised, and Maya knew she couldn't let this slide. Her firm's reputation was on the line, and she couldn't afford to lose the trust of her clients or the broader industry. She called an emergency meeting with her team, laying out the situation and brainstorming how to respond. "We've worked too hard for this," she said, her voice steady but laced with determination. "We'll address this head-on, with facts, transparency, and professionalism. They want us to panic, but we're not going to give them that satisfaction." As her team began gathering data to counter the allegations, Maya received another blow. A journalist from a well-known business publication reached out, requesting her comment on the accusations. Somehow, the email had leaked outside the company, and the story was beginning to gain traction. Maya felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but she refused to let it break her. This wasn't the first time she had faced a storm, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But just as she was preparing her response, another twist emerged. Late that evening, Maya received an anonymous tip from someone claiming to work within the company. The message was cryptic, but clear. "Be careful who you trust. This goes deeper than you think." Attached to the message was a document, a partial transcript of internal conversations within the company, discussing plans to discredit Maya and her firm. The conversations weren't explicit enough to serve as concrete evidence, but they hinted at a coordinated effort involving more than just Mr. Jacobs. Maya's mind raced as she pieced together the implications. If this wasn't just Mr. Jacobs acting alone, then who else was involved? And why? Was it about her personally, or was there a larger agenda at play? The questions swirled in her mind, each one more unsettling than the last. She realized that she was no longer dealing with a single adversary. This was something bigger, more calculated, and potentially more dangerous. The next morning, Maya decided to confront the issue directly. She scheduled a call with the company's senior executives, including Clara, who had supported her during the presentation. Maya outlined the situation, presenting her findings and demanding accountability. "This isn't just about my firm," she said firmly. "It's about integrity. If someone within your organization is spreading false information, it's your responsibility to address it." The room fell silent as the executives processed her words. Clara was the first to speak, her tone supportive but cautious. "Maya, I believe you and I want to help, but we'll need more than just this to take action. Let me do some digging on my end." As Clara began her own investigation, Maya focused on shoring up her defenses. She and her team compiled a detailed report outlining their work on the project and providing evidence to refute every accusation in the complaint. They also reached out to their other clients, reinforcing their trust and ensuring that this incident wouldn't cast a shadow over their broader relationships. As Maya walked away from the tense meeting, she felt an overwhelming sense of both exhaustion and triumph. The weight of the past few weeks had taken its toll, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe deeply, knowing that justice was on her side. The truth had come out, and those who sought to tarnish her name had been exposed. Still, the journey had left its mark, teaching her lessons she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Back at her office, her team greeted her with a mix of cheers and tears. They had watched her fight relentlessly, not just for herself, but for everyone who had put their trust in her. Maya took a moment to look at each of them, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. This wasn't just her victory, it was theirs. They had stood by her, supported her, and shown unwavering loyalty when it would have been easier to back away from the conflict. In many ways, this experience had strengthened their bond, turning them into more than just colleagues. They were a family. "Thank you," Maya said, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you. What we've achieved together proves that integrity and hard work will always win in the end. Let's remember this moment, not as a fight we had to endure, but as a testament to who we are and what we stand for." Over the next few weeks, Maya focused on rebuilding the trust and reputation of her firm. The story of her resilience had already begun to circulate in the industry, and instead of harming her career, the incident seemed to have elevated her status. Clients reached out with messages of support, some even commending her for handling such a difficult situation with grace. New opportunities poured in, and Maya's firm was busier than ever. Meanwhile, the internal investigation at the company revealed even more layers to the conspiracy, leading to a significant shakeup in its leadership. Clara, who had been instrumental in helping Maya uncover the truth, was promoted to a senior role where she could champion the kind of integrity that had been lacking. She and Maya stayed in close contact, their shared experience forming the foundation of a lasting professional friendship. As Maya's life began to stabilize, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about that initial interview with the company, the one where she had been humiliated and dismissed so easily. At the time, it had felt like a personal failure, a moment of rejection that cut deep. But now, standing on the other side of it all, she realized that experience had been the catalyst for everything that followed. It had pushed her to start her own firm, to carve her own path, and to prove to herself and the world that she was capable of greatness. One evening, as she sat in her office reviewing the latest project proposals, her assistant knocked softly on the door. "Maya," she said with a smile, "there's someone here to see you." It was a bright morning in the heart of the city, where the glass towers of corporate offices gleamed under the sun. Among the bustling crowd, Maya stepped into one of the most prestigious buildings, clutching her resume tightly in her hands. Her heart was pounding, not just from nerves, but from years of dreaming about this moment. She had worked tirelessly for this opportunity, a chance to land her dream job at one of the top firms in the country. She had the credentials, the experience, and the passion. But deep down, she knew that for someone like her, the path to success was rarely straightforward. Maya was no stranger to challenges. Born and raised in a working-class neighborhood, she'd have faced more than her fair share of obstacles. Yet, her determination had always pushed her forward. She had graduated at the top of her class, earning accolades and respect. But as a black woman in the corporate world, she had often found herself underestimated, overlooked, and sometimes outright dismissed. Today, she hoped things would be different. Today, she was determined to prove her worth. As she walked into the sleek conference room, her confidence faltered slightly. The room was intimidating: polished surfaces, sharp edges, and a long table that seemed to stretch forever. At the end of it sat the man who would be interviewing her, Mr. Jacobs. He was a towering figure in the corporate world, known for his no-nonsense demeanor and high standards. His reputation preceded him, and Maya had spent days preparing for this moment. The interview started smoothly enough. Maya answered each question with precision, her voice steady despite the knots in her stomach. She spoke about her achievements, her vision, and how she could contribute to the company. But as the minutes ticked by, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. Mr. Jacobs' tone grew colder, his questions sharper. He interrupted her repeatedly, barely letting her finish her thoughts. At first, Maya tried to brush it off as part of his tough personality. But then the comments started. It began subtly, a dismissive remark about her background. Then, a condescending question about whether she could handle the pressure of such a high-level role. Maya could feel the sting of his words, but she kept her composure. She had faced worse before, and she wasn't about to let anyone shake her. But when he leaned back in his chair, smirking, and said, "You're quite ambitious for someone with your circumstances," Maya felt her breath catch. She knew exactly what he meant, even if he didn't say it outright. The humiliation was palpable. Maya could feel her cheeks burn as he continued to undermine her qualifications and belittle her achievements. She wanted to stand up and walk out, but something inside her refused to give him the satisfaction. She sat there, her hands clenched under the table, answering every question with grace and dignity. When the interview finally ended, Maya walked out of the room with her head held high, even though her heart felt heavy. That night, as she replayed the interview in her mind, Maya couldn't shake the feeling of injustice. She had worked so hard, yet she had been treated as if she didn't belong. But rather than wallow in despair, Maya made a decision. She wasn't going to let this experience define her. If anything, it fueled her determination even more. She vowed to prove not just to Mr. Jacobs, but to herself that she was capable of greatness. Months turned into years, and Maya's journey was far from easy. She faced setback after setback, but each challenge only strengthened her resolve. She built her career brick by brick, eventually starting her own business. Her company grew rapidly, thanks to her vision and leadership. And then one day, fate brought her back to that same prestigious firm. But this time she wasn't there for an interview. She was there to take over as CEO. Maya's story is one of resilience, courage, and unyielding determination. It's a story that reminds us all that no matter how many doors close in our faces, it's up to us to keep pushing forward, to keep proving our worth, and to create our own opportunities. But how did she do it? How did Maya go from being humiliated in an interview to leading the very company that once dismissed her? Stay tuned to hear the full story, because this is just the beginning. Maya's rise to the top didn't happen overnight. The night of that disastrous interview, as she sat in her small apartment, staring at the city lights through her window, she allowed herself a moment to feel the weight of it all. The humiliation, the anger, and the sadness swept over her like a storm. She thought of all the late nights she'd spent studying, the sacrifices she'd made, and the hurdles she'd already overcome. How could one man, one interview, make her feel so small?